wish I could give you the classic. This happened to a friend of mine. I honestly, truly do. Then I could make it a lot less gruesome in my head than what it really was. Then I could doubt it like the rest of you, because even though this happened to me, even though there were witnesses, sometimes I'm not even quite sure I believe it myself. It's the wails of my now 4-year-old daughter at night that remind me that it did, indeed, happen. Katie had just turned 3 a couple of weeks before the incident. One thing I loved to do was take her to the theater every few Saturday mornings for a kids' movie presentation. It went from old classics like Snow White to recent Pixar movies. It was fun and enjoyable, and the way Katie mingled with other kids her age who loved the same movies. At the time, Katie was literally obsessed with anything related to Toy Story. We had all 3 movies on DVDs, which she watched religiously. Thank God I love those movies too, because you can get sick and tired of watching the same thing a minimum of 5 times a day, let me tell ya. And she also had Woody, Buzzy, and Jessie dolls, which she loved to sleep with. She was afraid of trucks by the time she had turned 2, so I told her to pull the string on either Jessie or Woody to scare the bad trucks away in the middle of the night. Honestly, these dolls were a blessing. So when I found out that Toy Story 3 was being shown at the kids' theater, I jumped on the occasion, even though Katie had seen it countless times before. There was nothing like watching it on the big screen, and I knew she'd be ecstatic. The showing was supposed to start at 8 a.m., but it didn't start until 9. It wasn't so bad, since the kids were having fun together. Some parents left, frustrated, but I stuck around, as did about half a dozen of other mothers and fathers with their kids. The theater employee apologized and offered us free candy. All good. I mean, who the heck refuses free candy? I'll go into the cliches of stories like this and say that the movie started normally because, well, it did. The intro was the part Katie loved the most, where Woody and Jessie chase the train and Buzz saves Woody at the last minute. Actually, nothing off happened for most of the showing. I mean, once in a while it would glitch, where the image would freeze for a second and then fast forward to catch up with the sound. While I noticed it, the kids didn't seem to care, as long as they got to see their heroes in jumbo size. Nearing the end was when things got strange. It didn't seem off at first, but I would soon find out, as every other family in the theater would. There's a point in the movie where Woody and the toys end up at the dump after Lotso managed to drag Woody into a dumpster, and the garbage truck picks them up. The Little Pizza Planet aliens get taken away by one of the trucks in the dump, and then Woody and his friends are carried into a conveyor belt. The moment they hit the belt, the screen flickered and the sound jammed on a constant loop, with the toys screaming when they fell. And then when they got a look at the well-known blue screen of death, with that awful screaming sound going on and on and on like a broken record. I always found the loopy, jumpy sounds that comes with blue screens of death disturbing. Hell, I even had a scratchy record or teeth chattering is eerie to me. Maybe it's because I used to have a computer that crashed on me every half hour and killed my files. It made me nervous. But when the father burst into mocking laughter, I uttered a nervous laugh too. The kids were confused, but for those who had just enough knowledge of computers, it was pretty funny. I had a friend who worked at this theater, and he quit for another job about it in the time computers replaced people in the cabins projecting the films. I guess nothing will ever really replace a good old human being. When nobody came to check up on us, the father got up and left to ask someone to turn the thing off or restart it. Katie didn't seem fazed by this and just shrugged it off, waiting patiently. She was always pretty smart and mature, knowing that she could watch it at home anyway. A little boy was crying, and the mother had to leave when the sound became ridiculously loud. It wasn't constant, that screaming sound, you see. It lowered to a near whisper and became loud enough to make my head buzz. At some point, Katie gave me a worried look as she clasped her hands over her ears. Before I made the final decision to leave, however, the screen went black and an employee returned with the father and a flashlight, apologizing and letting us all know that they would resume the movie shortly. Apparently they had been having equipment problems all morning. Shortly after the projector came back to life, the movie resumed a few minutes prior to the crash, only to crash at the very same spot a second time. Blue screen of death again. By then, the father and I were laughing our asses off. I mean, don't get me wrong, we only paid a $5 entrance fee, but this was getting ridiculous at this point. Seriously? The father exclaimed. This time, no one had to go and get any employee. The screen flickered and the movie started where it left off almost immediately, with a loud click coming from the cabin up behind me. It reminded me of a gun as I clacked the safety off, and I couldn't help but look up at the beam of light. It might have been the employee kicking the machine back in gear for all I knew. As long as it worked, I wasn't going to complain, but come this point, another mishap and I was gone. Watching it at home would have been a whole lot less troublesome. The movie seemed fine come this point, except for the sound. Like someone had put a pillow over the speakers to muffle it. Something else was odd, but I didn't notice what it was until Lotso betrayed the toys by not pressing the stop button on the belt and let them fall into the incinerator. It was their voices. Their voices were different. Not by a whole lot. Maybe the kids just didn't notice, but I certainly did. And I know the father did too, because we exchanged curious glances. They were similar, but Woody, for example, clearly wasn't voiced by Tom Hanks anymore. It was around that time that I felt something was really wrong. My stomach clenched painfully, and I felt my heart beat the drum roll. There was no reason for it. I had no explanation for the voices being different, only the differences didn't just end there. If you've seen the movie as many times as I have, you'll know that when the toys eventually give up and accept their fate by holding hands and waiting for their death, a light comes on and a giant claw hand, takes them out of the incinerator at the last second. It keeps you on edge for the first time, but once you've seen it, you know better. Except, I didn't know better. The animation was fluid, but by now it wasn't right. Have you ever watched those old 1930s cartoons like Betty Boop where everything is always moving and never stops? A few years later, they figured out that it was more natural to have stop animations because that's how we work. We don't notice it, but we stop between motions. Grab a cup of coffee, stop. Bring it to lips, stop. Chuck it down, stop. Put it back down, stop. It's subtle, but it made all the difference in animation when they realized that, and things started looking a whole lot less psychedelic from that moment on. Well, the animation on the big screen just didn't stop moving, like those old cartoons. There was no stopping in between actions and motions, like they sort of danced around everything in some way or another. And let me tell you, if you thought it looked psychedelic with 30s hand-drawn animation, computer animation makes it look twice as disturbing. That clearly was not like the movie I had at home, and it wasn't like the rest of the movie we watched to this point either. I noted the father looking at me again, and I shrugged. I didn't have any more of an explanation than he did. I suppose I remained seated out of gross curiosity. As the saying goes, it's like watching a train wreck, and no matter how horrible it is, you just can't look away. There was none of the dramatic music I was used to hearing. In fact, there was no music at all. Maybe it just wasn't necessary. Imagery was enough. Already I felt a lump in my throat just watching the animation. I couldn't move. Nailed to my seat. The claw saving the toys never came down. There was no heavenly light before a last-minute rescue. There was no rescue. The toys screamed and screamed and screamed, an ear-shattering scream that would ring in my head for days to come and would make me wake up in the middle of the night. The toys held hands which shrank as their plastic melted into a thick, flesh-colored goo. I remembered Woody's face the most, because this is what the screen mainly focused on as they advanced towards the fiery pit in the middle. Black bubbles popped first in his cheeks, and then his gaping mouth opened wide, wider than it was humanly possible. his lips stretching to rich lengths until his whole jaw melted off of its hinges, leaving long, thick, liquid streaks of burning plastic behind. I was reminded the way cheese strings, when warm and melted, would force a completely insane bout of laughter out of me. Cheese and plastic? What the fuck was I even looking at? The banshee-like screaming escalated and escalated with the speakers all around us. It came from everywhere at once. My stomach cramped as despair ripped through me, and I thought I would collapse right then and there. I couldn't move, glued to my seat. Woody's eyes rolled down his cheeks like they weren't painted on, but were real globes of gelatinous substance which burst like egg yolks, leaving gaping holes in its place. Their eyes, all of their eyes, were the only thing that acted as real eyes might. Not like plastic or fabric. Later I realized why. Eyes are the mirror of the soul. Eyes, even if they look painted, are always real. Always. And so as they exploded into a liquid state, so did their souls, burning in the fiery pits of hell. It's silly to think that way of a cartoon character, but that's the only explanation I found for this difference. I'm not really sure if it makes me feel any better to think that way. In fact, thinking about it now, it just makes me feel completely worse. Woody's hat had melted over his head and shaped it unnaturally, and with the fabric of his clothing caught fire on one burst. It crackled like some demonic laughter, burst into sparks, convulsing back, except he didn't go far because his hands were fused with Slinky and Buzz's hands. The screaming was like the sound of pure hell, like something from a demon. The voices, though wrong, had sounded human until now. I felt a sharp cramp in my hands because I'd been holding on to my arm, the arm of the seat, as though they were in my lifeline. And in some way, they were. The action kept me grounded because part of me feared I'd end up in that pit and melt off as well if I didn't keep some of myself in this kind of reality. Most of the footage focused on Woody, but you got a glimpse of the others too. Toys like Buzz and Rex, toys that were made explicitly of plastic, melted quickly in a disturbingly colorful goo. There was no blood. Just plastic melting, molding itself off and bursting into flames. It was horrible and graphic. Maybe it was because you get to know these characters so well that you feel them alive, despite the fact that they're toys or cartoons. You don't need blood and organs spilled. You just need to see their suffering. So deep you feel it too, that I even felt my own skin start to prick and burn in response. I should have gotten out sooner, taking Katie away from me to spare her. It was a mistake on my part not to, and I regret it for the rest of my life. The screeching turned into wails, and I was able to come to out of my trance long enough to realize that the sound was crying and screaming didn't come from the speakers anymore, but from the people around me. There was nothing but the sound of the cackling fire from the pit around us now. The toys were dead, but the children and the adults alike, myself including, were the ones screaming and crying. With a sudden burst of strength, I grabbed Katie in my arms and ran out of the theater. I didn't look back, though I could now smell the burning plastic. It wasn't just stuck in my nose. It clung to my clothes and my skin as well. I thought I heard someone vomit behind me. I'm surprised I didn't do the same. I noted the father had scurried past me, and then again he might have been smarter than me and left before I did. He was yelling at the employee who stood giving tickets. The poor kid didn't even seem to know what was going on. He seemed overwhelmed by the screaming and the crying. Soon enough, a small crowd of parents were surrounding him. Things started getting pretty violent and the kid had to escape. I just stood there with Katie screaming in my arms, half hearing her still in shock. I felt completely lost. I didn't know what the heck to do or even where to go. I mean, should I go home? Join the mob of angry parents and wailing children? Go to the police? What? My feet moved on their own and I let my instincts take over. The door. I was leaving. It was better for Katie anyway, to keep her away from this place. I felt empty and the smell of burning plastic seemed even stronger as I stepped outside. When a hand gripped my arm, I jumped and yelled. It was the father with his child in his arms, sobbing in his shoulder. It turned out that his name was Jeremy, We exchanged phone numbers after he told me he would see for it to get an explanation about what had happened. The rest of the day did not go well. I took 2 baths with Katie, but this death stench wouldn't leave us. Eventually, she stopped crying and fell asleep out of pure exhaustion. As for me, even though I was completely off, even though I felt like I could fall asleep too, I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lifelike eyes of Woody slip down his cheeks and burst, or his jaw hanging loose until it crashed into his lap. Just before my husband came home from work, I got a call from Jeremy. I remember slumping on my chair as he spoke, and a new set of hot tears streamed down my cheeks. My head hurt and my eyes burned. I thought they might pop out right too. Jeremy said that the theater's management took the remaining few parents to see the computer that headed the projection of the movie. Sure enough, they found a virus stored in there, which streamed a homemade version of the movie. But the streaming led to nowhere. Jeremy's job was to handle computers, so he was able to look through it for those who couldn't. He tried tracking back where the streaming had came from and the virus, but there was no lead to follow. Either the prankster was an employee and had set up the virus from the computer itself, had covered his tracks very well, or something was very, very, very wrong with this picture. I preferred a rational explanation to something of outer nature, so I opted out to believe that it was just an employee who had access to the computer. Either way, other than the corrupted files the virus had left behind, there was no evidence of the disturbing footage we had watched. It was gone. And that was a little more than a year ago. Anything related to Toy Story has since left my house. My husband. He wants to believe us, but I can tell he's extremely skeptical. He says someone had to animate the thing, and people had to act out the voices, and that takes a lot of dedication because while the animation was constantly moving, the quality of the image and the characters was as good as the original movies. He said that's one hell of an effort to put into one-time pranks. He's right though. I never heard of anything of the sort again. You'd think it would just come out of it, and I checked, and Jeremy did too. There were no records of anything like it anywhere. Jeremy even tried to contact Disney and Pixar, but they never returned his calls or emails, as expected. The theater's closed now. I think someone sued them after what had happened, but all the news mentioned was bankruptcy. To this day, I still get a whiff of burning plastic once in a while Katie screams at night, suffering greatly from those horrible, horrible nightmares. And that, my little shadows, was Toy Story 3 Alternate Ending. A Toy Story 3 Creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? Well, people, a blast from the mother-frickin' past, am I correct? I mean, think of it. All this entire story itself, I remember when I first did this one, and I think this is when I first got my computer. And I think this was one of the first, actually no, this is probably the second YouTube video I made that had a ton of audio effects in there. And probably one of my, I wouldn't say extremely popular videos, but definitely one of those higher up videos that did pretty well. And if anything, I originally was not going to do any kind of narration for this, because I thought it's already perfect. You know, what's the whole point? But after taking a little bit of time to think, I'm like, you know what? This can be a billion times better. And of course, this is what you guys see now. It's probably not too very different compared to the last one that I did, and I do apologize if it seems a little, repetitive, I guess. But I'm quite sure you guys are going to be, forgetting about that late at night when you're going to be sleeping and you're going to have terrible nightmares about Woody's eyes popping out of his freaking head. So, yeah. Now, as for the story itself, let's actually get on to the review. The story was awesome. Like, probably one of my #1 favorite Toy Story creepypastas. And apparently it's a lot of people's favorites, because this one is just downright epic. I love the heavy amount of detail in it. I love the metaphors used. I love the realism with everything. Everything that kind of went by. And I love the sense of mystery put into this amazing story. Like, I could actually visualize every single thing that was in there. I mean, that was awesome. This creepypasta is a classical story, and I genuinely can say that out of all the pastas I've narrated, this one is one of the few that are genuinely a favorite of mine. Now, I've got a lot more, obviously, but this one, just it feels good to do it again. It feels good to look back at it and try and improve on it more. Which, really thinking about it, the last time I did this narration, I noticed that the music was a bit too loud, and my voice was kind of overpowered by some of these. Now, in this one, all the times that my voice is overpowered by some of the music, that's purposely there. It's there so that, it kind of catches you off guard and freaks you out and makes you shit yourself. That's the reason why I have that there. And with the story, with the amount of detail and everything that's put into it, I had to really, put more into this and make it a little bit better for all of you guys to enjoy. But yeah, the story was amazing, it was terrifying, it was freaky, and I genuinely love it. And I also want to thank you guys so much for sitting there and supporting me throughout this channel. We finally got to 16,000, and now we're on our way to 17,000. No, this is not a sub special, for anybody wondering. Still going to be working on the Backyardigans Backyard Adventures for anybody, like I said, for anybody wondering. I'm still going to keep doing those. But like I always said, review-wise, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regard to these creepypastas, and this is simply just my thoughts. My final rating of the story is an obvious 10 out of 10. Beautiful storyline, beautiful everything, I loved every ounce of it, it's just, congratulations to the author, you did a damn good job. But what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys not? Also, what would you have personally done to help make the story a lot better? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. I'm the Shadow Reader. Thanks again for watching today's episode. And like always, roll the outro because I'm out. In fear and surprise as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven nightmarish gore filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.